The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. Can people hear me? If people can hear me, oh, thank you very much. Can you hear me clearly? Good morning. Brilliant. So now I get in good morning. They can hear you, and it's 293 people here. So good morning, everyone. I'm glad you can hear me and see the PowerPoint. Indeed, this is the first time I've given a presentation not seeing anyone, so it's a bit awkward for me, but it will be very exciting. So today I'll talk about Introduction to Psychology, and I am a lecturer in the psychology department, and here we do actually have lectures where I can see people, and now I'm just sitting in my office talking to the computer. But what I will do is that I will speak for 15 minutes because I'm here on my own. Then after 15 minutes I will stop and give you the chance to write questions, and then I will take about 10 minutes to answer those questions. So 15 minutes, please do not interrupt because I'll be talking and I will not have chance to answer any questions. After 15 minutes then I will give you time to write your questions, and I will answer as many as possible. Now, let's start with Introduction to Psychology. Presumably, no one of you has got much experience with psychology, so I will start with the very basics into what is psychology. Now, imagine this guy here would say, I'm a psychologist to his friends. What sometimes might happen is that someone says, ooh, I better be careful in case you're reading my mind. Or someone would say, oh dear, can you tell what I'm thinking from my body language? So this is things people often get when they hear someone is a psychologist. Now let's face those allegations. Can we read each other's minds? I can just see here that you cannot see the following slides. No, you can't. That's very strange. See? How does this happen? I'm showing my screen. Ah, can you see this now, facing the allegations? Okay, brilliant. Now let me start again because I really had very nice slides and I wanted you to see them all. So, someone says, I'm a psychologist. Ah, you see that now. Someone says, I'm a psychologist, and what often happens is that you say, oh, can you read my mind? Or you maybe can tell what I'm thinking from my body language. Now, let's face those allegations. You still can't. Yes, now you can see it. Now, the first allegations, we're obviously not able to read your mind, because if I could read your mind, I'd be doing it all the time. Believe me, I wouldn't be sitting here giving this talk. I'd be a really rich person in Hawaii charging a fortune for reading people's mind. Because, for example, see in criminal cases, say the person to be charged, he might say, well, I didn't do it, then I could just come in, read their mind, and there you go. Or if, you know, you're a married couple and you're worried your husband is cheating, well, easy, you could just pay me, I read their mind, no problem. So obviously you see that currently no one can read each other's mind, because otherwise we'd be doing it all the time and super rich and charging a fortune. So that's obviously a myth. And then, however, though, it's not that silly because consider future technology. What you see here, not for you to remember, but just to let you know, is a portable EEG headset, and scientists are currently developing things. For instance, you can actually see with the EEG waves whether somebody is, say, seeing a picture of a person or a picture of a tree. So maybe in the future it might be possible that we can all read each other's mind. And I mean, even this is a bit like crazy for me. Like I'm sitting here and I don't see anyone, but I'm giving a lecture. So maybe in the future I just have to think about the lecture and then it gets all implanted in your brain. But that's of course all just science fiction. At the moment it's not possible. And now look at, can you see this now? Body language. There you go. So body language. Now lots of people say psychologists can read emotions from body language. Well, if you look at this picture here on the left, if you look at the picture on the left, then do you think the wife is attracted to the man? And if you look at the second picture on the right, do you think the wife is attracted to the man? Yes. So it's obvious. It's not something that psychologists can do, but it's something obvious. If you have an open gesture, then obviously you're more attracted than if you have a closed gesture. So the second allegation that only psychologists can read body language is of course something that here in the example you see basically everyone can read signs from body language. So again, that's a myth. So what is psychology then? So here I have this definition. Psychology is a scientific study of behavior of individuals and their mental processes. So you see, psychology is a science, much like physics or math, because what we do is that we do experiments. We have hypotheses from everyday life. For example, if you sit there not with your legs crossed over, you're kind of more open to the person next to you. So if you think that, then the psychologist would conduct an experiment, a scientific experiment, to test this hypothesis, this idea. So we have things we all observe, you know, when we're coming around, you know, maybe if it's good weather, you're happier. And from all this everyday observation, we then systematically look at that in experiments, whether what we observe is really true. And psychologists look at behavior, so how humans behave, and they also look at their mental processes, so what they think, the way they think as well. So if you can see this now, so psychology goes beyond common sense in that we don't only just say you like your friend better than someone you don't know. No, we would test for it to see whether these everyday observations are really valid against an experiment. So therefore, we test views to either confirm or disconfirm them. And it's important to understand that compared to everyone as a psychologist, or we can read each other's mind, it's important to know that what psychologists find and what they talk is based on research and on experiments, and therefore, and that's what we study, how to conduct an experiment to scientifically investigate everyday experiences. So here you see psychology as a science, so we systematically answer specific question. So and therefore we have different methods, quantitative or qualitative. Quantitative would be that we measure these things. Let me give you an example. Let's say the question of a child is more aggressive when they're exposed to violence on TV. So we would have then to measure all these things. We have to define what do we mean by the child is more aggressive. We might have to give them a questionnaire that we can say child 1 is 10 aggressive, child 2 is 5 aggressive, but do we only mean aggression that they are fighting, or do we also mean verbal aggression? So we have to put all these things, like the aggressive child, as well as the aggression on TV, we have to define what we mean and put it into numbers. And then we can do an experiment where we, for example, show one group of children a really nice non-aggressive TV show and the other group of children a very aggressive TV show, and then we can measure their aggression. So that's the classical way where you would quantify these things like aggression, attraction, love. You would somehow have to quantify that. Now, qualitative is also something valuable where people give interviews. So you could ask a child about their experience. You could ask them, and you of course get a lot more individual data. If you ask a child how they felt after they watched this, you could also then measure the approach by using these individual experiences. But in order to get a scientific result that applies for a lot of people, it's obviously difficult if you just ask one child. So the common way to do is, and the common way to, for example, say aggression, aggressive TV makes children more aggressive, is of course to ask a lot of them. Yeah, so what we learned here so far is that psychology is a science in that you quantify your everyday experiences into numbers, and you do an experiment in order to find valid messages. Oh, that's the first time I wanted to stop actually. Yeah, so now I sorted out, I think, the technical problems, and I hope you also understood the content of the first bit. So please do feel free, if you have any questions already, to write them now. Thank you. So I've got the first question here: how do you quantify emotions? Well, that is difficult, but you do unfortunately have to. So one way to do that would be to just ask, how anxious do you feel on a scale from 1 to 10? But you could also, for example, measure the heart rate and the pulse. You know, when you're anxious, your heart rate increases. So you could take that as well to quantify an emotion. Or you could scan someone's brain, because there's actually some region who are more active than others when you're emotional. So no, it sounds weird because you think an emotion is something so personal, so individual, that you can't put a measure to it. But unfortunately, that's what we're doing at the moment in order to get these general general answers. Next one is would an example of quantitative be the blue eye-brown eye experiment done in the USA? I don't understand that. I don't know the blue eye-brown eye experiment. So I'm sorry, I don't know what this means. And then somebody writes me, according to Kuhn's paradigm, psychology is not a science, as not all areas of psychology confirm to employ a singular scientific or empirical methodology, such as qualitative health psychology. Well, I have to disagree with that, because even though you don't apply the same empirical methods of, in one example, you do an experiment, in the other example you just observe someone's behavior, or in another example you maybe use a brain scan, even though there's different ways of investigation, it's still all empirically as if there is a hypothesis and you're testing it. So it doesn't really matter of the measure you're using, but it more matters of having a hypothesis and a paradigm and testing that. I understand quantitative, but I'm still unsure about qualitative. When, why would you use this? It's hard to, the main thing what we use is quantitative. Qualitative is really when you want to have a deep insight from a single person. Maybe a good example would be a case study. If you have a very unusual patient presenting with a very unusual combination of symptoms, or they have a very rare disease, then it would be very good to get this person's experience of his problems, because it's very rare and because maybe he's unique in the combination of problems he's got. So there you would, but it would also be in a way an experiment, because you would before make a questionnaire or a interview, a guideline, and then go to him and ask the question you thought about before, and then try to get an understanding of his specific problems. And often these qualitative measures only lead then to new ideas for an experiment and a quantitative measure. So it's more to generate new hypotheses, to get the inside of the feelings of an individual. Okay. Yes, I want, this next one is about recommending books. Of course, I want to do that. When the lecture will be published online on Tulip, we will also have a reading list with a number of books that I recommend for you. And you don't need to read them all. Basically, I will recommend about 5 books, and you can choose there the one which is most understandable for you. So next to the lecture and the recording of this talk will be a Word document with the recommended books. Would it be more appropriate to use quantitative approaches in terms of time and money? Yes, that's a very good point, because that's true. Of course, if you use quantitative measures, then you can test a lot of people in a very short time, and it's cheaper than if you would have long conversations with individuals. How is psychology involved in nursing? That will become clear very soon when we proceed, because first I want to introduce to general psychology, and then in about 40 minutes I will talk about very relevant examples for you. Psychology is very relevant for nursing, and you'll soon hear why. If you have to ask a lot of people, is this then qualitative? No. If you have to ask a lot of people, then if you ask a lot of people, it's generally quantitative. If you ask one person in depth, that's qualitative. Oh, still so many questions. Okay, I'm gonna... how is psychology science? I'm just reading all the questions and see if I can pick out some example ones, because I now see that I'm unable to answer them all. Yes, so one question is about the books and the exam, which I think is very important. So it's really good for you if you attend this lecture, because of course the exam will be based, I mean, you'll have a book, and I will tell you which chapters are there relevant for the exam. But of course the question that I'm addressing now that are on the slides are the ones that are more likely to come in the exam than something that's in the book, in the chapter, but not in my talk. So after this on Tulip you will see the books that are recommended and the chapters that you need to read for the exams, but it's obviously more likely that something will come in the exam that's in the book, as well as I've been talking about it as if it was just in the book. Yeah, and now I get this message, there's like 400 people in the webinar. You can't answer all the questions. Yeah, well, I just noticed that myself too. So I really hope that I've tried to answer some of the questions. So you should look at the book, which is going to be available online, where it will tell you which chapters of the book are relevant for the exam, but sorry. Okay, yeah. And then the other thing is, I hope you understood the differences between quantitative and qualitative. Qualitative is just when you have a single patient and you ask them about their individual experience, and it's more that it would generate you a hypothesis for an experiment, which is the most commonly used measure in psychology, where you ask a lot of people and quantify. So put your what you want to measure, for example, aggression or emotions, etc., into numbers. Right, now I'll have to carry on now. Just moving this question thing. Oh, where's it gone now? All right, so I'll have to carry on now. And yeah. Is it not responding again? Ah, there you go. I can see what you can see, but you should now see overview of approaches. Ah, there you can see it. Where is the chat? Ah, can people still hear me now? Can they? If people can hear me now, could you just raise your hands again? Thank you. Ah, okay. All right. Okay. Now, I want to continue now with talking about different approaches or theories in psychology. One is the psychodynamic, second the behavioral, and third the cognitive approach. I just want to briefly go into this, because some of you will hear these approaches again in a subsequent lecture in 2 weeks. But I still want to introduce these approaches first to you. So let's start with the psychodynamic approach. There you can see it. Right, so the psychodynamic approach goes back to old Freud, Sigmund Freud, from Austria, like me actually. So Sigmund Freud had this theory again, which I just want to really briefly introduce, and it's not going to be relevant in the exam to discuss his theory. So briefly what he was talking was that people have certain drives. They have sexual drives, yes, you heard that right, sexual drives, and aggressive drives. So for example, he talked about the Oedipus complex, or what you would say in German Oedipus complex, where a young child would want to, of course unconsciously, want to marry their father, a girl, and get rid of their mother. So you can see the aggression and the sexual kind of drive in that. So he said that even young children have all these unconscious fantasies of sexual and aggressive nature. And he was speaking about 3 instances, he said, people had in their brain or in their body. He didn't specify that. He said the id, the ego, and the superego. So the drives, your sexual and aggressive desires, they're all like your little devil, the id. And then you have the superego, which is like society, or the angel who said you can't do that, you need to, be appropriate in society. And then there's the ego. So you are in the middle between the devil and the angel, the it and the superego, and you find a compromise in how to fulfill your desires, but also go with the norms of society. That's really all you need to know, because the theory by itself will not come in the exam, nor do I want to further go into it. Much more relevant is, because it's an old approach, it's from after the Second World War, so what you now want to know is what is still relevant of this old approach. So therefore, and that's relevant for the exam, and that's relevant for you, and that's what you should keep, is, so what does old Freud help us for our nursing, our psychology today? There's really 2 things that old Freud introduced that are still very relevant, because we all agree that the theory with the sex and all that's a bit, and young children, and they want to marry their father, that's all a bit weird. Anyway, what's certainly still very relevant is these 2 things. Are they coming up? Yeah. So number 1 is the unconscious or automatic. That's quite difficult to understand, but let me try. Freud was the first person to say that not everything we do is a decision, is something that we really decide to do. There are things we do without really knowing why we're doing that. Okay, I'll give you an example. Have you ever felt suddenly quite nervous, and you didn't know why? Or you suddenly said something and you kind of didn't know why you did that now? So it's not, or you got suddenly quite angry and then you regretted it later because you kind of didn't really want to do it. So not everything we do is something that we decide to do. And there's a quite interesting experiment that might demonstrate that. So if I would show you very, very briefly the picture of a Diet Coke, and I would show it to you so briefly that you surely, truly, I promise, would not tell me you've seen anything. But then if you go to the shop with me, guess what you'd buy? Or if I would talk to you, and this is, I don't know if you know it, I think it's on Channel 4, Darren Brown, where he suddenly seemed to be influencing people, and then suddenly they said, I know which number you're going to choose, and then they all choose number 8, and suddenly you knew it before, and you think, my God, how does that work? That's another example. It's called priming. if I tell you all the time, you know, you've got to choose a round number around 80, so if I'm already kind of priming you to say something, you're probably going to say it. Or for example, people were reading a story about ducks in the pond. And then later on, even though they just thought they were reading that story, later on they asked them to choose an animal. And guess which one they chose? Or another really, really good example, and that maybe you want to write down, because that's very easy for you to understand also for the exam. There was an experiment, and in this experiment, people saw a lot of Chinese characters, and they didn't speak Chinese, they were all English, and they didn't know any of the characters at all, and they were just seeing hundreds of these different characters. And then if you ask them later, well, do you remember any you saw, they'd say, no, of course not, it's really difficult, all these Chinese characters. Now, afterwards, they showed them new ones, which of course, again, they were Chinese and they didn't know them, and all the other new 100 were all different, but one was one they saw before. And then they asked them, have you seen any of them before? And they said, of course not. But then they asked them, which one do you like most? And in the second experiment, in the second time, remember, they were all new, but one they had seen before. But they did not at all remember they had seen that before. But they liked it most. And they absolutely could not tell you why. So just that is an example to show you that not everything we do, we make a conscious, pure decision we want to do it. But that sometimes something, a memory, an emotion influences your behavior without you knowing that. The second thing is the attachment theory, John Bowlby. So old good Freud was the first person who actually said in psychology that childhood plays a role. And now, when we talk about attachment theory, we talk about that children who are badly attached, who have a bad childhood, obviously this has an effect on their adulthood. Not solely, but it surely plays a role. And Freud was the first person to announce that your experience in childhood play a role in adulthood. And John Bowlby was the first person later who also found that the worse children are attached to their parents in childhood, the more the negative the effect is that has. So he categorized 3 styles of attachment, and he found that those who were worst attached, who had the most negative attachment to their parent, they also were more likely to have problems in adulthood. So of course you see that that's quite obvious, isn't it? If a child has a really bad childhood and is not attached, so doesn't get any love from their parents, then of course that influences how they grow up. And that was, again, goes back to old Freud, who was the first person who recognized that. Right. I'm just waiting for you to see my slide. There it is. The second one is the behavioral approach. Again, I need to remind you that all these approaches you will hear later again in a different lecture, but still I want to introduce you to them. And also again here for my talk, what's relevant for the exam is not the behavioral approach now here per se, but the applications today. So let me just briefly introduce you to the old behavioral approach. So unlike Freud, who was thinking childhood and your thinking, that all plays a role, behaviorists did say it doesn't matter what's in your head. It's just we're going to look at what we put in and what comes out. So it's a bit like, and that's why I also said I did a lot of animal experiments. You know, you give them something nice. So for example, you give the dog a bone, and then the dog comes to you. So you just look at what do you do and what happens. So you don't think, so you give the dog a bone and the dog comes to you. You don't say the dog liked it also, because that's your thinking or your emotions. You forget about all that. You just see what happens, what do I do, and what does the animal or the person does. What's the result? So on the bottom now you see the dog, and that's an example of Pavlov, of the classical conditioning. So in picture number 1, you give the dog a bone, and you can see the saliva, so you record that. And then next time in number 2, the dog hears a bell. Oh, now I've gone too far. Here's a bell, and then in number 3, what they do is combine the two. So every time, just briefly before he gets the bone, the bell rings. So you can see the bell is previously neutral because you can see no saliva with the bell. But now you can see the two are combined. First a little bit the bell, then the bone. So what happens now is that the previous neutral stimuli, as you see it in 2, the bell, who doesn't do anything, now becomes a conditioned stimuli, which is in number 4. So in number 4, just ringing the bell does something in the dog, in that it makes him produce the saliva. That is classical conditioning, and the mouse is a funny example for operant conditioning, where they look at reward and punishment. So they find that if a mouse can learn to press a lever, because every time it does that, it gets rewarded by food. Now imagine the mouse would press the lever and then it would get an electric shock. Then of course it wouldn't do that anymore. So as you can see here in behaviorism, we only look, in this case at animals, but also at humans, at what do we put in, what comes out. Nothing to do with emotion, nothing to do with thinking, nothing to do with your feelings, nothing. Behaviorism purely looks at what comes in, what comes out. Now, now for the exam, I want you to, rather than this, what I just said now from the behavioral approach, I would want you to see at the behavioral approach today that's relevant for you. So what is still relevant today? I'm just checking whether you can see my slides. Yeah. So what is still relevant today is reward learning, and that's based on behaviorism. So of course, if you do something and you get praised, you're more likely to do it again. Of course not always, and we're not like animals. Like if you praise your dog, you're definitely going to do that again. Humans might not, but surely it might increase your probability. So now the first connection for nursing, if you had a patient and he would do something that was maybe difficult for him, or maybe he wouldn't look after himself or have a shower, and then he does it. And of course, if he gets praised and he sees a positive outcome from that, it's more likely he might do it again. It's not definitely, it's not an animal. Maybe he wants to do it, he wants to not do it on purpose then, but surely it should increase the probability. So rewarding someone for a behavior you want to see again has got a positive, is very good. Right. Okay, now I'm just waiting for you to see this next slide, which is a cognitive approach. Now the cognitive approach looks inside people. Cognitive means thinking. Remember, Freud was about childhood and your desires. Behaviorism didn't think about what humans think, their emotions, nothing. This one now, though, does. It looks at how people think. It wouldn't just say, you know, the person gets rewarded, they'll do it again. It would say, the person gets rewarded, he likes to be rewarded, and does it again. So it takes the inside, what you're thinking, what's in your brain. The cognitive approach takes that into account as well. So first of all, we want to look at cognitive processes, that's thinking processes. And this is now most relevant for you. First of all, thinking, there's also beliefs, your beliefs, for example, about health and illness. So if we have a medical condition, then our beliefs, where that, for example, comes from, play a role. Do we think it's a medical condition, or do we think it's a psychological condition? Or generally, say someone has a headache, then how they respond to the doctor giving them a treatment, say paracetamol, obviously also on whether they then really take it, of course also depends on their beliefs about where it's coming from. Maybe they think it's a different genetic thing why they have it. So it's important to take people's beliefs about why they're sick, what can be done, into account. Another cognitive thing, another thinking element is memory. So, for example, it's a lot of information. If you're a patient, you receive a lot of information, and it's also that you remember those, that you remember the healthcare information that's given to you, that you remember when to take medication. And the third process, which is also your thinking, is decision making. We make a lot of decisions about our health all the time. For example, we make decisions about whether to smoke or not, or we make decisions whether to eat healthy food or not, or we make decisions whether to stick to the medication we gave, or we make decisions about whether to even attend to see a doctor or a nurse. So all these thinking processes, beliefs, memory, and decision making, affect your thinking. Now I'm at the end of the, oh, I'm not. What's happened now? So the final thing I was going to show you, you see black now, don't you? I don't know why. It should come back in a minute. So the final thing here, and people talked about before, is of course not just your thinking processes, but also your emotions. So, for example, if you're ill, that might make you more anxious, that might make you depressed. If you have a medical condition, it might change your emotions and then maybe also change your thinking. So what you should remember from this is that in the cognitive approach, we say that different thinking patterns and our emotion, of course, affect our behavior and also our health behavior, what we do. All right, that's it first again now. You've got the time now to write me questions and I'll answer them. Thank you. All right, now a lot of people I see are asking questions about an exam, about book. So I'm only giving this one lecture here. I'm usually lecturing the psychology department. So best is to just, this lecture will be recorded and then I will also give books there, but your course should surely inform you further about the details. So I'm just speaking, if my section is here relevant for your exam, then it will be what is on the slides, and I will also recommend a reading that includes all what I've just been talking about. So since I'm only giving one lecture here with you, you should check with your own course about the exam relevant questions, or when which exam is, etc. But it will all become clear. You won't be having to worry about that, because on Tulip you will see the recommended reading list. Your tutor will tell you which exam, what is relevant where, and the information will be given to you well in advance. That's so a final thing about exam, I will also check with your course leader who asked me from your department here to give this lecture to see, and then give you the information on Tulip as soon as I know. So next to this recording of the broadcast, I will also add to this document what I told you about the recommended reading, what exactly you'll have to do. With the module leader of your department. Right, now back to the content. What else? So here I've got the last question in, which, oh, we can't see anyone's question. So can you give some example of theories for the cognitive approach? So one example might be a good example, because all these three different, and I see, yeah, so if you think about therapy, all these three different approaches are also therapeutic. I mean, people would do therapy based on the approaches. Now let's first, though I come to the cognitive approach, but let's first start with Freud. If a patient came to Freud and said, I'm anxious, what Freud would do is, of course, he would say, yes, what about your childhood? Maybe you're just anxious because you project your unconscious from your father. So he would let the patient lie on the couch for ages and talk about their childhood, etc., and then hope that by doing that, the anxiety would go away. So the idea in Freud is that every problem is rooted in your childhood, in something bad that's happened there, and that if only he would find out what that was, then you wouldn't be anxious anymore. Now, the behavioral approach, if you were anxious and you came to see a behavioral psychologist, they would just think, well, they're anxious, that's a fact, so we've got to train them not to be anxious anymore. So say if you were anxious flying, they would say, well, go on the plane, go look at the picture of a plane, maybe fly for 10 minutes, then fly for 20 minutes, and then they would say, it's very nice, you're flying, you would maybe get some nice chocolate after you've done it. So they would just make you do it. Now the cognitive approach. The cognitive approach, they would look at people's ill thinking, and they would try to change the way they think. So they would, for example, if you're anxious about flying, they would say, maybe you are ill-informed. Maybe you're anxious about flying because you think the plane is going to crash. So the cognitive psychologists want to change your thinking by, for example, informing you that it's very unlikely for a plane to crash. So cognitive psychologists would think that anxiety or any problems arise from some thinking that's gone wrong. So for example, in depression, you might think you're really bad, you're always bad, you're going to fail in everything. So they think that your beliefs, your thoughts are malfunctioning. And they would want to change your cognitive or your thinking pattern. Now I hear which approach is more, which is more appropriate for nurses, etc. So what psychologists do at the moment, most psychologists, they use a cognitive approach. What the most common treatment in psychology nowadays is cognitive behavior treatment. So they want to change, so they would do a combination of the cognitive and the behavioral approach. If someone is afraid about flying, they would try to give them information to tell you, it's not going to crash. So to change your thinking about that. And they would also make you do it. So a behavioral approach. So it really depends. The most common treatment today is cognitive behavior treatment, and that's what psychologists do. It's just that you know about it, but it's of course not that a nurse would do it, but it's very important that you also know about it, because in order to be trained to do this treatment requires a full degree, and so you first do psychology and then you get further training. So you really should just get some idea, some initial understanding about this. So what you should just really remember is that cognitive approach looks at thinking processes, malfunctioning thinking processes, whilst behavior approach looks at just the behavior and they want to change that without looking into cognitive or emotional processes. And now I see if you can do CBT training, if you're a mental health nurse, you have to, in order to do CBT training, you either have to be a doctor or a psychologist, but you can surely, to inform you further, do certain courses on it, but you wouldn't get a recognized degree for this training. But still, though, you can contribute a lot to it by understanding the fundamentals of it and by contributing and helping to you know, because now when you see a patient, you might also help to try to change their thinking, to try to increase their memory about healthcare, to improve their decision making just by knowing a bit about the approach. I'm just looking what other questions there are now. Yeah, these are again all about the different approaches. I think I talked about that. My God, there's so many questions, but I think I hopefully covered most of it, and we'll continue now with the lecture. Right. Yeah, I'm just waiting for you now to see my slides again. Yeah. Now I want to now talk more. This all has been quite psychology lasting. So now in the second hour we should talk about something that might be more relevant to you, and that you can see is based on this cognitive approach, because we talked in the cognitive approach about beliefs, memory and decision making, and I want to go into more detail about those now. So first of all, beliefs. So what I already briefly said is that people's beliefs can influence. And I remember now somebody was asking that, they were saying, you know, just because someone believes in something it wouldn't change. Oh yes, of course. I want to give you an example of an experiment that I only recently read, which is quite remarkable. It's really interesting. So what happened was that there were housekeepers in hotels. And there were two groups. And the first group of housekeepers, they said to them, you know, what you're doing, your job, you know, cleaning the rooms in the hotel, that's really exercise. That's really sports. That's, you're doing a day, you're doing actually more sports than what is even recommended by the government. So they told these housekeepers, your work is really, really sports and very good and healthy and it's sports. The other group of housekeepers, they didn't tell them that. Now they found that there was no difference in what these cleaning personnel did. So they didn't change their diet, they didn't change their cleaning, nothing else changed. Just one group got the information, what you're doing is sports, and one group didn't. The one who got the information, what you're doing is sports, 2 weeks later they lost 2 pounds. Really? It's a shame, really, because I hope you're laughing now, because that is really true. It's a placebo effect. Let me give you another example of a placebo effect. So a placebo is a sugar pill with no active biological ingredients, but when people believe in it, it has an effect. So, for example, lots of people show effects of placebo, sort of just a body lotion on pain, even though there's no substance in it that would actually reduce the pain. Or, an example for myself, I'm very prone to placebo effects. In fact, once I did myself an experiment where I gave people a drug and a placebo, and I wanted to look at the effects of this drug on emotion. In any case, so the drug actually reduces your heartbeat, so how many times your heart beats. So the drug influences that. And then there was this girl in the experiment, and I was really worried about her because her heartbeat dropped, and I was going to call a doctor, and she had the placebo. So you can see placebo, so what people believe, can to a very, very big extent influence the effect on health. So if the doctor just gives them a drug, and then they truly don't want to take it, or they truly don't think that's the right thing to take, it would be good if someone could help to tell them about, if that's possible, to help them why the drug would benefit, because it's shown that if it was possible that the treatment was not only just given, but that you also believed in it, that would really have a great impact. So by you contributing in telling people how this medication might help them and is good for them, could surely also affect the result of the medication. Then the next thing here is the perception of health and illness. So why we become ill and how and whether we recover. So if I'm thinking, if I have a condition, if I have, let me try to give you an example. So anxiety. A lot of people who suffer from anxiety present with physical rather than emotional problems. So they might say they felt dizzy. But it might be that they feel dizzy because as part of the symptoms of their anxiety. Or they might just notice their heart going very fast because they're very anxious. But they don't think that the anxiety is their problem. They think it's their heart that's the problem. Now, if a doctor now would tell them, well, it's just your anxiety, just calm down, then they probably would just go and see another one. So if they think they have a physiological cause, but the doctor just superimpose on them that they don't, then that's not very helpful. So what I'm thinking why I'm ill, and what I'm thinking how can something be cured, is of course important too. So there again you could help them trying to find out about patients' beliefs, why they're ill. Do they think it's psychological? Does that really correspond to their real cause? So just to talk to them to find out why they think they're ill and what should be done, how they recover, you might just find differences between the real thing of what's been diagnosed and what they think. And if that is so, then that might influence whether they get better or not. The next thing is help-seeking behavior. I mean, a lot of people, if they don't think they're ill, they wouldn't go to see their GP. Or a lot of people say, well, you can deal with it. So, maybe you don't, even though you are ill. A good example is alcoholism. Sometimes alcoholism, people wouldn't believe they're ill. They think we're just having a lot of wine all the time. So if they don't think they're ill, they obviously wouldn't also go to see a person to help. So your perception of health and illness also influence your help-seeking behavior. And then also reporting of symptoms. So sometimes, so that's an important thing. People might exaggerate, or people might find some symptoms are much more important than others, or forget about them, or say, again, this example with anxiety, they might just say, my heart is beating all the time. But they forget to say that they also feel stressed, but because they're so concerned that their heart is beating. So it's not like that a patient would actually come up and then list all the symptoms from the school book. They would maybe just mention the ones who are troubling them most, or exaggerate some because they think it's so important. And they would also maybe believe that these are indicative of a certain illness, even though they're not. So that is just to say, this is just all examples of how you might see that a patient's thinking, so going back to the cognitive approach, how a patient's thinking can influence what they're doing. And yeah, and the final thing, of course, decision-making regarding treatment. So if I'm not thinking I'm ill, or if I think the nurse telling me here now to have a shower, and why wouldn't I? I'm just normal, just never do that, and I'm not ill, I don't need that. Then, of course, that's going to influence. If you have the decision you're not ill, then of course you wouldn't feel you need treatment. So, and there, changing people's beliefs, you can see, can also change all these items. So if I tell, say, an alcoholic, well, you need to recognize you have an illness, then they might seek help. Then they might think they need treatment. Then they might think it's not something that's, the norm. So changing their thinking about their illness is important, and is part of the cognitive approach who looks at thinking and cognition. Oh, one more. Yeah, adherence to treatment. That means whether you stick to the treatment or not. So again, that's a sub-point under people's belief. So if you, of course, believe you're not ill, you wouldn't stick to the treatment. And if you think the treatment is not effective because it's not the right treatment, you maybe think, then of course you don't stick to it either. So treatment success can greatly, because it's not about you ill, you get a drug and you get healthy. There is where the psychology might come in, because if you actually think you're not ill, or you're reporting wrong symptoms, or then you wouldn't take the drug. So all these, and I hope I was able to demonstrate that, it's not only just you're ill, you get a drug and you're fine. Your brain, your thinking can influence all that to a great deal. And what you can do is try to just acknowledge that fact and be aware of that, and maybe help to try to make the best decision for the patient. The next point under the cognitive approach is behavior and decision making. So what else is important is that there is a large behavioral component to a lot of medical conditions. So, for example, heart disease. Heart disease is obviously a medical condition, but our diet, whether we're overweight or not, our exercise habits and stress, which are all kind of things that could be changed, affect this kind of medical condition. So we have a large behavioral component in also medical issues. So these, if they are changed, so if people get informed to change their diet, to change their exercise pattern, to change how they deal with stress, then that can also contribute to health and illness, as any, well, to some extent also as a drug, or can contribute to the effect of medication. And then of course cancer. So whether we get, for example, lung cancer, it's got to do with whether we smoke or not, or our diet can influence certain forms of bowel cancer. So your behavior greatly affects, and the decisions you make, so your psychology, your thinking, obviously greatly influence your health and illness. And then we have this kind of circular relationship. Let's try to read this together. So people with chronic illnesses are more prone to psychological problems. So we have first the illness and then the psychological problems. But the other way around, people with psychological problems are more prone to physical illness. Yes. So the first one might be easy to understand. So, for example, people with heart disease are more likely to become depressed, or if you're chronically ill, of course, that's affecting all your lifestyle. You have to maybe go to the hospital all the time, see a doctor. You're around with this, hospital and people, staff. So, of course, if you have a chronic illness, you might be more likely to have a psychological effect, so you might become depressed because the illness is very troubling you, etc. But then also it's the other way around. So people with psychological problems are more prone to physical illness. So for example, people who are more depressed are more likely to develop heart disease. And that is because they wouldn't look after themselves, they would maybe smoke, they would have not exercise, have a bad habit. So what I want to tell you here is that it's a two-way thing. It's health and psychology belong together. Another good example is eczema. Eczema, the skin condition, is obviously genetic. So you obviously, not everyone is going to get it. So you obviously have to have something medical there, a genetic, some fault in your genes. But this condition, the skin rashes, they obviously can become much worse if you're stressed. That's not saying then you're imagining it, or it's like just psychosomatic, or just, it's not recognizing it. No, it just sees how the psychology contribute to your health. Because people who are, say, already maybe prone to get skin rashes, or prone to get depression, or prone to get anxiety, when then the psychology is negative as well, and then they maybe don't exercise, they don't look after themselves, then this biology can come together with the psychology and contribute to health and illness. All right, then now time for questions. Right. Somebody's asking, is this also due to socio-economic status, wealth, poverty, etc.? Very good question, I think, because yes, of course it is. I mean, unfortunately, some, who come from a very well background, they have maybe the opportunity to eat smoked salmon all the time, and have a personal trainer, and others who are not that fortunate. They have it harder in society, to get to the same privileges, to, for example, just do sports or to go to right school. So what we call it, and that I will talk about in a minute, is your psychology, is your biology, and is social factors. If you're from a very deprived background, you obviously have less chances to engage in health behavior, or you must make a bigger effort. And maybe if you're from a very deprived background, lots of people would, drink or smoke, and then it's more difficult for you not to do that. So yes, of course, wealth, poverty, that plays a role, and also in a kind of circular relationship. Say, because it's all intertwined together. I hope you understand that. Say if you are if you have a chronic illness, then you might not be able to work. Then you might go to a poorer poor area where you live, and in this poor area also has a negative effect again though on your psychology and on your health. So they're all factors contribute together to your health and illness. So it's just to understand that it's not just drugs and something physical. It's a lot of other factors that play a role too. Oh, somebody said I was a brilliant lecturer. Thank you. Okay. Let me try this one. Are those with psychological problems less likely to have physical factors considered than those with chronic illness to have their psychological factors considered? No. Let me just... Those with psychological problems less likely to have physical factors. That's... So you mean... I don't know if you mean... Well, I can't ask you, of course. But of course, often, because you say those with psychological problems less likely to have physical factors considered. Yeah, that's because often people with also severe mental health problems, they think it's always their mental health, and they don't at all think they're also going to get a cold or something. So yes, that is true. So we can't forget that it's a combination of things. It's a combination of psychology, psychological problems, combination of physical problems as well. And I find it a good example with the eczema, really, because never mind how stressed people are, some just don't get eczema, skin rashes. Of course not, never, because there has to be biology too. So it's a combination. Surely cannot cure a severe health problem. How do you get people to believe that improving their cognitive behavior will decrease symptoms of their ill health, when deep down they will know that with chronic illness they will not be cured? Oh, let me try to read this out. Surely psychology cannot cure a severe health problem. No. How do you get people to believe that improving their cognitive and behavioral thinking will decrease symptoms of their ill health, when deep down they will know that with chronic illness they will not be cured? No, they will not. And that's true. But it's say someone has a serious chronic medical illness and say it can't be cured. Well, then of course you can't just say as a psychologist, well, think about it positively and then you'll be happy and healthy. No. And the most important thing we also want to do is increase medicine. And for example, the skin rashes, we should have a condition that treats the genes and proper treatment that cures the disease. However, though, psychology can contribute it to a greater extent than we previously thought. So if you have a chronic illness and if there is no cure for it, then positively accepting it can at least take the peaks of it so that you don't exaggerate it. There are some conditions which perfectly do not occur at all if you don't, if you're not stressed. So for example, the skin rashes, you really don't get them unless you're really stressed. But if there's really no medical treatment at the moment, then a positive belief could make it more feasible for you and also avoid it getting worse. I'm just going to take a 2-minute break to answer this phone that's ringing 50 times already. 2 minutes. Okay, I'm back already. Are people there? Oh. Yes, people are there. Hello, I'm back. Okay, so another 40 minutes, huh? Right. Yeah, so I'm just waiting for you to see my next slide. There it is. This is the key thing. This is also something I was told you here in a future lecture again. But this is one really important thing. So I want to introduce the biopsychosocial approach to health. So here you see this human. And now we can see that, of course, to health, it's not just psychological. No. So it's physiological and biochemical processes plus psychosocial processes, and they contribute to health and illness. And we have this big little, because you see the plus and then you see this thing there, so it really interacts with each other. So you have to have, so there's biological changes, psychological changes, and social changes that all contribute to your health. And now this is something now very new. It's even because in the past, and you don't need to know that for an exam or anything, it's just for you, for your information, because it's so striking. In the past, people thought your genes is your genes, and the genes is what you inherit to the next generation. So if you, for example, have genes for brown hair, the next child, depending on whom you're doing it with, but you can't change your genes. For a lot of time, people thought that. However, though, recently, epigenetics, yeah. So recently they found that psychological factors can change your genes, not change your genes per se, but change the way your genes are switched on and off. And the most striking thing, you can even inherit that. So it's really a combination of psychology and biology. We shouldn't forget, though, and I found this comment really good, that it's just psychology that, contributes to your health. It's a combination of the two. But if you are from a very deprived background and if you have got negative social and psychological processes, it looks like now nearly in the future that you can even inherit that. But again, this is not for you to study or so. It's just some information because it's very interesting. And also in the future lecture, you will hear more about the biopsychosocial model, which says that a circular process of psychology, social factors, and biology contribute to your health. And the next thing because I'd be the only one talking about this really, because there's different psychologists, and I'm a social psychologist. So social psychologists look at how people interact with each other, not at just the individual, but how people interact. And one of my work is related to prejudice. So mental health has still a huge stigma attached to it, and that's particularly bad if we're dealing with adult patients or young patients. So the most common kind of notion, if you think about mental health still these days, is that they're completely lunatic, stupid people. And a lot of people think that. So if you say, in fact, I've been in a psychiatric hospital, they think you've been running around screaming and saying things in a white coat, and and probably people also are frightened. They think that people with mental health are dangerous. So, and then you might think, well, all right, but the stigma against mental health contributes especially in mental health, contributes a great factor again to the recovery of the patient. So by reducing the stigma, you would automatically then improve the person's social environment, the person's psychology, and therefore would greatly increase the chances of the person recovering. And the World Health Organization, they have made various surveys where they found that really stigma per se, stigma on its own, so being negative towards people just because they are suffering from mental illness, really greatly contributes to mental health not improving in patients, to mental health developing to be more severe. So it is a very important issue. Oops. Where is my webinar? Oh, there it is. So it's a very important issue to face the stigma. Just a second. Oh, no. Oh, yeah. So to face the stigma of mental health. So how can you do that? How can you change people's beliefs? First of all, it's the patient themselves who think, now I'm in a mental health unit, I'm probably not going to get a job because now I've got this, and people are going to not find that positive, and they're probably going to laugh about me. So first of all is to take away this these negative feelings from the patient and say that it has already greatly improved. There's great chances of people with disability to go to university, to get jobs, and that now, as compared to the past, in the United Kingdom and in America, is get more and more recognized for people to have difficult times and to suffer from those health problems. But the most important thing is to actually not tell the patient, but to tell their family, tell their friends, because what mostly is the issue with stigma, with prejudice, and that's what my own research is about, is that it's fear. It's fear about something you don't know. You might think it's an illness, or even to call it a mental illness, you would immediately think it's like ill, maybe it's infectious, and if people have the belief that they're dangerous. So to face the stigma is also to inform the parents and the schools and close friends of the patient about the condition, and that it's not dangerous, that they're not running around crazy in white coats, but that they're just having a difficult time, and that with medication and also with care and information that will overcome that. So it's fear comes from not knowing. So stigma could be helped if society, but also the closest friends and family of the patient, have got the right information, know what it looks like in a unit, and that they don't just see that as a locked, psychiatric kind of place, but more like that, you have an open day, people can come in, it's not bad, it's just something that we face, that's normal. And information reduces fear, and fear reduces stigma. Right, so now I just need to summarize everything we've done, and then I'm already finished, so then I've got a lot of time to answer final questions. So what should we remember? Many patients will only mention physical symptoms, but there might be underlying psychological problems as well. Physical and psychological problems are highly related, as we've learned in the biopsychological model. Psychological intervention, e.g. cognitive behavioral. So an adequate therapy for a patient is always two things. It depends on the individual, on what's most appropriate for them, but besides medication, also psychological interventions such as changing their beliefs and changing their behavior can contribute together with the drug to health. So behavior is an important contributing factor in health. People often behave in ways that make them ill or make their illness worse. Smoking, not going out, neglecting their, maybe also tooth health, general health, general cleanness. So if they take the medication or not, if they listen to what's been recommended, etc. So behavior, so just to kind of sum up, what you do is based on what you think, and this can contribute to your health. People behave in ways that make it hard for professionals to work with them, and I guess that you might have encountered before. So because if people think they're not ill, they don't need treatment, so they wouldn't take the drug, they'd be doing destructive behavior, and some of that might be caused by the way what they think they've got, and so changing their thinking, changing their pattern, and also just positively reinforcing them for little steps might be a way to go. So finally, what you will learn soon also is how to interact with people, interact with the patients, be aware what we learned today, that the psychology plays a role, their beliefs play a role, praise them for positive behavior, see that it's not just biology, but you can also, you can contribute to their beliefs. So I hope you see your role here. Thank you for your contribution, which you can do. You can contribute by showing them, trying to change their belief, praising them for positive behavior, understanding what's behind illness, that it's not just something medical, but it's a combination of something medical and something psychological. And what is in my own most interest is, of course, educating the person and educating their family to reduce the stigma and prejudice that's associated with mental health. Thank you very much. I guess I can't hear you clapping, but people say thank you. Thank you. So please do not ask questions. We still got about 20 minutes left. Thank you, thank you. I wish I could see you now. Thank you very much. Thank you. So now, thank you very much. I'd be happy now to answer your questions. Oh, I'm really pleased to hear that people enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it too. It was my first webinar. All right. So someone wants to see the previous slide. This one. Previous slide. Oh, and all right, so someone wants to see this one, biopsychosocial model, so I'm just going to show that first. So somebody said they wanted to just finish a point on here. I'm just going to show that, and then I'm going to show the last slide again. So now somebody can finish their sentence on there. Have you finished that now? All right, and then somebody wanted to see the last slide again, which is this one. Why don't you see? Okay. Can these slides be printed out by ourselves? So again, I understand that on your webpage on Tulip you will get the slides as well as the recording of this webinar. So of course, yeah, then you should be able to print them. I would always recommend, if you print them, that you don't print one slide, one page. With PowerPoint, when you click on print, it usually gives you the option to print 5 or 6 slides on one page. So I'd suggest somebody said that the slides are already on Tulip. So yeah, so please look on Tulip, and I recommend you don't print like one slide, one page, but 6 slides, one page. Do you know where the recordings are kept? I think that once this, because I recorded it now, so I think that once this webinar is finished, it will also appear on Tulip. On Tulip, on the top left-hand side, you will have a little, I think a little icon saying go to webinar, and then it'll appear there. That's how I understand it. So, and then again about recommending books, and I will just look myself on your Tulip page and see that I can add some books and chapters there that will cover everything that I've been talking about. Okay. Is there any psychological studies on nursing care? Definitely. Lots and lots and lots. So how do you find them? What you can do is, if you're interested in any more details of the studies, first look in the book that I will recommend you, because that will mention all studies that are also mentioned, as well as the author, etc. And then if you still can't find one particular one I was talking about in the lecture, it might be because I was just mentioning that because you didn't need to remember it. So any experiment that will be relevant for any exam will also be in the book. So definitely, if I mention something that that I just mentioned as an example, but you can't find it in the book, then it will obviously not be asked. But if you're still interested to find a particular study, how you could do that is also either emailing me. My email is sylvia.turbeck@plymouth.ac.uk, and you can find research by yourself by going to a website which is called Google Scholar. So you go to the normal Google page, as you always do, type in Scholar, S-C-H-O-L-A-R, Then you come to the Google Scholar webpage, and then, for example, someone was interested in psychological studies on nursing care. So there you could, for example, put in key search words such as nursing care and psychology, and immediately you will find studies in this area. So going to Google Scholar, typing in the keywords of the research you're interested in will help you to find these articles. Also, there's even a scientific journal of nursing. I'm not quite sure what it's called, but it's called something like Nursing Studies, the journal. You'd have to type it in Google to find it. So there's a whole journals dedicated to just research in the area of nursing. So there's a lot of experiments there. Yeah, and then again, we cannot see the recordings on Tulip. This recording will only appear on Tulip after it's been finished. So because the session is still going on and still recorded, it's not on Tulip yet. So it'll only appear, I don't know if I put it on today or tomorrow, but of course only after it's finished here. And then, okay. Thank you. Okay, so then going back, right, so that's my final slide. Thank you for your contribution. It's been exciting to give my first webinar. I will close this now, and thank you for your positive comments. Good luck with your job. Good luck and all the best.
The organizer has ended the session, and this call will be disconnected. Goodbye.